In this Masonic lesson, we'll cover degrees, a Mason's graduation system. We'll witness sacred rituals and showcase a variety of Masonic and Illuminati symbolism.
Google the words DIA conspiracy and there are 46,000 results. Many believe it's being used for government cover-up.
And they point to the underground tunnels, the airport's art, and references to the New World Order's proof.
What is the profession? Yeah, which profession we're talking about? Just look at it. Is it a legal profession? Of course it's legal. That's too bright. That's too bright. Well, anyway.
Oh, Mason, are you a Mason?
Of course I am.
Okay. Yeah, you are. That's a secret ceremony.
Well, you might as well put your pinky out when you drink your drink. Put your pinky out.
You're involved in the secret ceremony.
It's got one more to check.
DIA has been featured on several TV shows, including one starring Jesse Ventura.
The airport's Masonic plaque, which seems to recognize a New World Order.
New World Airport Commission?
Yes.
Who are they? What the hell is this?
The mysterious murals.
Things on fire and masked men stabbing doves.
Every one of our major cities contains a monument of Masonic secrecy. Ornate temples closed to outsiders, but open to suspicion. These fantastic structures are largely funded by generous member dues and donations. They've devised a hierarchy system from novice Masons to masters. 33 levels called degrees. Each one reached through a secret initiation rewarded with a secret password. Members swear never to utter outside of the lodge under Masonic penalty of death.
There's an explanation for everything.
Where DIA art director Matt Chesansky attempts to explain what they really mean.
It's talking about the destruction of the environment, pollution, the endangered species.
Hi, I'm James Cooper and I'm a Freemason.
I am a Prince Hall Freemason.
I am a Freemason.
I'm a Freemason.
And I am a Freemason.
Hello, I'm Janet Wintermute, and I'm a Freemason.
The roster of the Brotherhood includes everyone from Kramerica's Kramer, NBA All-Stars to astronauts, from presidents to ordinary people who may have believed they joined a social club, but have soon found themselves enchanted and tangled with ancient oaths and secret signs. Let's look further at the role Freemasonry plays in mainstream media.
And this machine around us, this so-called music industry, is such a demonic thing.
He was listening to my verse, and I said one particular word, and when he heard that word, Freemason.
Ready. Wait. Now look at this. What is this? On ESPN, national TV.
All of this that might be total rubbish, or there might be something to it. You know, I'm into the Illuminati, Bohemian Grove.
Hey, Newt, what'd you do with the Bohemian Grove? Never answer that question. Why do you keep dodging questions about the Bohemian Grove up here, Newt? What'd you do with the Bohemian Grove? Good to see you. How come you keep dodging questions about the Bohemian Grove, sir? Newt, seriously, why all the secrecy?
Have you been there for the ceremony with the cremation of care?
Frankly, I don't think that's something I need to talk to you about.
New York Post says that male prostitutes are shipped into the Bohemian Grove, and you don't want to know what Richard Nixon said about the place.
The Bohemian Grove that I attend, from time to time, the Easterners and the others that come there, but it is the most faggy goddamn thing you could ever imagine in San Francisco crowd.
Do you actually believe all this junk?
Bill Clinton said that Republicans run around naked in the woods there.
Did you say the Bohemian Club? That's where all those rich Republicans...
Can I get a quick autograph here? What's this picture of?
Actually don't remember.
See you at the Bohemian Grove. Okay. You told me that I'm delusional.
I sold my soul to the devil. I know it's a crappy deal. Music came with a few toys like a Happy Meal.
Lucifer is? Yeah. Say that again. Lucifer is a pure, holy...
Virtuous.
Virtuous. Now, is he the Lucifer that God created?
That's the same one.
See, this is what a Mason confesses, is that Lucifer is light.
In the year 1717, a group of pioneering future Masons gathered at a pub called the Goose and Gridiron and formally pledged their allegiance to a club they called the Freemasons. Only 6 years after their meeting at the pub, they already had hundreds of members, several branches called lodges, and a written constitution filled with Masonic symbols, signs, handclasps, and even their own alphabet. New members must be approved by secret ballot. A white ball signifies a yes vote. A single dark stone means exclusion. It's the origin of the term blackball or blackballed. The most important Masonic symbols have remained unchanged since the 1700s.
Masonic.
We'll start with the letter G, a popular Masonic symbol. Next we have the square, which represents honesty and fair dealing. The compass was intended to remind members to restrain their desires and to encompass their deeds within a moral code. Dozens of cryptic gestures and complex handshakes allow Freemasons to identify each other and the degree each one has reached.
The stonemason who is traveling from one building site to another, maybe between countries even, over hundreds of miles, who can't read and write, okay? How is he going to identify himself to someone else that he is a stonemason? Well, he's got handshakes.
Even your closest friend could become your enemy over that, on that eye on the dollar bill, you know, that evil, the devil, the evil devil, you know what I mean?
But when he heard it, he was like, and I saw like his facial expression like, yeah.
And you have somebody, George Tenet, acknowledging in his book that he knew that the administration was deceiving the American people into a situation that is murdering young men and women from this country and others. That George Tenet and Dick Cheney and Condoleezza Rice and George Bush et al. Should be in fucking jail.
Hey, hold on a second. We are going to do that. So, let's... There we go.
Yale University's Skull and Bones Club, which has deep roots in Freemasonry, was founded in 1832 by William Huntington Russell. This cultish playpen for the sons of America's most powerful families has unfolded Presidents Taft, Franklin Roosevelt, George Bush, George W. Bush, and John Kerry.
A new world order. A world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations.
Historically, this five-pointed star was man, right? It meant man. And if you flipped it upside down, the upside-down five-pointed star, with the goat, with his chinny chin chin and his ears and his horns, was the sign of Satan worshippers. It was a satanic star.
Now, at the end of the room was a very large curtain. Through the curtain was stuck a big head, goat's head.
Now, you can see on the American flag, our stars are right side up.
And they called it the head of Baphomet, the head that the Knights Templar are supposed to have worshipped. During the initiation, the Grand Master would say to you, go and kiss the backside of Baphomet.
All across America, you'll see symbols with five-pointed stars. The stars are right side up, the man stars. But around the year 2000, the Republican Party changed their logo from the stars being right side up to the stars being upside down. Coincided with the coming on the scene of George W. Bush and Karl Rove. Very strange.
I kissed the backside of this disgusting-looking goat. So I did, being somebody who doesn't really care. And when you get through there, it's actually a naked woman. So the backside of Baphomet is a reward if you do as you're told.
Whether they come from the Muslim world or the Buddhist world or the Christian world.
Well, look who's here to poke your husband.
Whether they're conscious of it or not, they're members of the body of Christ.
Freemasonry is the latest incarnation of what is known as the underground stream. This is a hidden stream of knowledge that has been passed down since the dawn of human history.
We attempt to make good men better. We can't make bad men good. The other one, the one that I prefer, is a peculiar system of morality. And peculiar, of course, here means unusual or special. So a peculiar system of morality, veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols, of which we have lots and lots and lots.
My name is Jeff Russell. I am current master of the lodge of Atomic Lodge number 5. Rightly or wrongly, we know who killed JFK. We know what happened at Area 51. People like that, ooh, that's secret.
It's not a secret society in that sense, but it is a society with a secret.
We, as Muslims, we want to bring an end to terrorism more than anybody else.
Republican candidate Herman Cain backed up the Constitution and Americans' right to a speedy trial by a jury of one's peers.
The Central Intelligence Agency wants him dead or alive, but apparently the American-born terrorist has been a guest of honor at the Pentagon.
Take the guy out, saying we don't need no stinking trial, we're just going to kill him.
We do know that currently Alaki is a high priority target for the U.S.
He should be charged, and since he's an American, he should be tried in our courts. Close quote.
I know some here wish that I could just bypass Congress, change the law myself. I know there's some folks who wish I could just bypass Congress. Now, I know some people want me to bypass Congress and change the laws on my own. So I'll issue an executive order. Believe me, I can. And believe me, right now dealing with Congress, the idea
you'll never be able to prove it.
They murdered my brother, and they know who they are.
They'll just pick apart your life as they're able to over a period of time.
It's about power and control.
Yeah.
You know, they control the world.
And be aware there's some shit going on. So I would suggest you don't do that.
I wonder who's next, because it always happens in threes.
How many people do you know personally who have died suddenly and mysteriously in the past 5 years? I have personally known 8 actors, all of whom I have worked with and was close to. Heath Ledger, Chris Penn, David Carradine, and Mummy. I believe these actors were waxed, and I believe that many others, such as Britney Spears, Lindsay Lohan, and Mel Gibson, are being played to get at their money, who are mercilessly slandering me and trying to kill my career, and I believe murder me.
I do promise and swear, under no less penalty than to have my breast torn open.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration.
Freemasonry defines itself as being a system of morality. The basis of Freemasonry, which all Masons go through, is the Blue Lodge. the Blue Lodge being the first 3 degrees or levels of Freemasonry. Entered Apprentice, the 1st degree, Fellowcraft, the 2nd degree, and Master Mason, the 3rd degree. Most Masons never go beyond 3rd degree. Although if one chooses to go beyond the Blue Lodge, there are 2 routes that can be taken. One is the York Rite, and one is the Scottish Rite. Most Masons who decide to go past the Blue Lodge enter the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. The Scottish Rite has 32 degrees. The 32nd can lead one into the Shriners, if one so chooses. The 33rd degree, which does exist, is largely honorary. Author Ian Taylor has extensively researched the origins of modern Freemasonry.
To many people, the very word Freemasonry evokes a sense of mystery, secret society, and so on. But in order to find out what they're all about, we need to know a little history. There were many humanist thinkers back in the 1500s who saw the corruption that there was in the church of the day, and they concluded that in order to get rid of that corruption, they would have to be a new world order. They had read Plato's Republic. Plato's Republic in the 1500s was now a popular work, and Plato too was a Greek philosopher living in the 5th century BC, and he too was totally fed up with the corruption that there was in government. He said, if we could have a group of wise men who were well paid to rule over the people, then there would be no corruption. It's a nice thought, but a rather naive one. We've seen such governments today, and they are totally corrupt. But nevertheless, there are still people today, many people, who think that it is a good idea. This then was the agenda for the humanist thinkers back in the 1500s. But in order to do that, they had to first destroy the existing world order. The existing world order based upon the rules of God, through the king and through the church. But to even suggest this would have been seen to be heresy in its day, and they would have lost their heads quite literally. And so they had to go into a secret society. Now the Freemasons in that day, these were craft masons. These were the men who actually built the cathedrals of the day. They were highly skilled men, and it was like an early trade union, and they wanted to keep the secrets of their skills to themselves. Good reasons for that. And so the humanist thinkers infiltrated into the craft Masonic lodges, and they then became the speculative Masons. They were called speculative Masons by the craft Masons because they wouldn't have known a square from a compass. They were just the humanists, the idealists, the academics, and so there are within the Masonic lodges today 2 types of Mason. The craft Mason, who is the genuine Mason and cuts stone and so on, and then there is the speculative Mason, and he's the humanist thinker. He's the person who his purpose is to rebuild a new world order.
Author and lecturer Ron Carlson has dedicated 2 years to researching the subject of Freemasonry.
Well, modern Masonry actually began in the year 1717 in England. The lodge was formed, and many of these things were developed after 1717 in England, and then came to America and Canada as people migrated to North America during those years, and is widely established here in North America. It's estimated close to 5 million men are involved in Freemasonry here in North America, perhaps 1 million in the Shriners.
What is Masonry in the eyes of the Freemason? What does the Mason view it to be?
Well, you find that most Masons go into Masonry viewing it simply as a fraternal organization, kind of an advanced Boy Scouts because their father or grandfather was involved in Masonry. And they get into it naively, not realizing that it is a religious organization designed for very specific spiritual purposes.
Over the centuries, man has evolved a variety of religious beliefs and traditions. Some of these, such as Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, are monotheistic. That is, they're based on the concept of one supreme deity. Others, such as Hinduism, are polytheistic, believing in many gods and goddesses. But one of the oldest religions is also the most universal, emerging virtually unchanged in geographically separated and radically diverse cultures. This is the religion of paganism, the worship of the moon goddess and the sun god, whether they're called Isis and Osiris, Apollo and Diana, Cernunnos and Aradia, or a host of other names. Paganism is the same mystical religion that first emerged in ancient Babylon thousands of years ago. But what has paganism got to do with Freemasonry?
The ritual and theology of Freemasonry really originates from Egyptian paganism. And the reason for this is that, as we find, in 1717, the rituals and theology were formalized and brought together and formed the Grand Lodge in England. The reason being that there were a great many lodges throughout England and throughout Europe at that time. They all had slightly different practices. These practices had originated from the origins of the speculative Masons, which of course was Rosicrucianism. The Rosicrucians believed in the Hermetic and Egyptian traditions, and as we'll find within Freemasonry, we find Osiris, Adonis, and Isis mentioned quite frequently. So of course these are the Egyptian pagan symbols, pagan gods. One of the rituals that was used in some of the lodges prior to 1717, and shortly after in fact, was the ritual of the blood initiation rite. This was where the little finger was cut and blood was shed, and this was the new member doing that, making a blood covenant with the organization.
What happens is when a Mason joins the lodge, he first enters into what is called the Blue Lodge. And the very first thing that every Mason is required to do is to go through a initiation ceremony. It's called the Entered Apprentice Degree. And in that initiation ceremony, he will be stripped of much of his clothing, a blindfold will be placed over his eyes, a noose will be placed around his neck, and he will be brought to the door of the Masonic lodge. And there a person will greet him and usher him in, and there he will come before an altar. And every Mason stands before an altar, and there behind the altar is a man called the Worshipful Master of the Lodge.
Today we find that when the new member joins the organization, he kneels, he's blindfolded, he's bare-breasted, and the Master of the Lodge touches his left breast with a sharply pointed sword.
And they are then required, with this blindfold over their eyes, to take a blood oath, not to reveal the secrets of Masonry, or they will lose their life. Every Mason puts his thumb to his throat, and he swears a blood oath not to reveal the secrets of Masonry, or he'll have his throat cut from ear to ear, his bowels ripped open and given to the beasts of the field. And these pagan blood oaths are taken to swear them to secrecy, so they will not reveal the secrets of what they will learn as they progress through the Masonic Lodge. Now, most men will go into the Scottish Rite and progress on through 32 degrees, and in each one of those degrees, they give worship to different gods and deities, Egyptian gods, Persian gods, Greek gods, and they go through a series of rituals. Now, much of this is covered up by symbols and allegories, so that Masons, as they go through it, don't fully understand what they're doing.
In the blue degrees, an initiate is initiated into the Egyptian trinity of the ancient mysteries of Egypt. And this Egyptian trinity is hidden from the initiate. He does not know at all what he is being initiated into. It's not even mentioned.
But if they would read their authoritative books which explain the symbols and the allegories, it becomes very obvious what they're involved in. They're involved in pagan, idolatrous worship, much of it based upon the Kabbalah, which is the ancient Jewish book of the occult.
It is based on Egyptian paganism and the worship of nature, is really what it is. It is based on the worship of the male regenerative power, the female regenerative power, okay, and their product.
Any historian will readily agree that paganism is and was essentially a nature religion. Its rituals were intentionally designed around the phases of the moon, the seasons and the vernal equinox, etc. Rituals were developed to encourage abundant crops, usually by seeking the blessing of the sun, the giver of warmth, and the counterbalance of the moon, the timepiece for planting and harvesting. From this duality of worship, the sun and moon, light and darkness, active and passive, male and female, paganism developed fertility rites based upon the sex act, and more specifically, the reproductive organs themselves.
Washington, D.C. is one of the world's most important cities. Here the future of America is decided. But who makes these decisions? The President? Congress? Some believe there is a force behind the throne of elected office, one with international reach and none of the rules constraining public officials, the Brotherhood of Free and Accepted Masons. Could Freemasons really control Washington? How do we know? Here are the facts. No one knows when the Freemasons originally formed, but the group rose to prominence in the 17th century, making it older than the United States. This secretive organization places great power in ancient imagery. Their traditions are steeped in symbolism, but no outside observers know what these symbols represent, or what kind of power the images are supposed to have. Over the centuries, Freemasonry expanded from England to countries across the globe. Today, there are more than 6 million Masons worldwide. In the U.S., Freemasonry continues the same secret tradition as its European founders, and the leaders of U.S. Masonry congregate in Washington, D.C., where some researchers say they've etched their strange obsession with symbols onto the city streets. Washington, D.C. was founded on July 16, 1790, and named after George Washington, who was both the nation's first president and a powerful Freemason. Some of the city's designers were also rumored to be Freemasons. But I've been to D.C. It doesn't look that strange. The conservative Greco-Roman buildings seem normal for a nation's capital. When I spent a week in Washington, I didn't notice any signs of Masonry, but maybe I should have paid closer attention. To some observers, the city is chock full of Masonic imagery, from the strange statues scattered around the mall to the eerie Washington Monument. Take, for example, the House of the Temple. Located at the heart of D.C. at 16th and S Street, the House of the Temple holds the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite, the center of all Masonic activity in North America. The multi-million-dollar building also houses one of the world's most extensive collections of Masonic literature. The Masons present themselves as a service organization, a harmless charity. So why have conspiracy theorists paid so much attention to Freemasonry? And why is a harmless charity based in a top-secret building in the middle of downtown Washington, just walking distance to the National Mall? The National Mall brings us to another oddity, the Washington Monument. As homages go, a statue would suffice. Why reproduce an ancient Egyptian artifact? Here's where it gets crazy. The Washington Monument is actually an obelisk, a type of magical symbol found in Egypt, the Middle East, and Asia. Some sources believe the Washington obelisk rests upon a ley line. These ley lines are invisible, mystical currents of energy that span the globe, connecting ancient sites of power like Stonehenge and Incan temples. Ley line theorists believe this energy can be used to cause hallucinations or natural disasters, such as earthquakes and magnetic anomalies. The location of the Washington Monument may allow its controllers to harness this natural energy for their own purposes, whatever those may be. And why is our Department of Defense based in a Pentagon? Speculation varies. Some anti-Mason activists believe the Pentagon is built to replicate earlier structures built by the Knights Templar, one of history's most successful secret societies and the world's first international bankers. Others think the shape of the Pentagon creates a reservoir of energy from the ley lines, giving Washington's rulers a way to store the harnessed potential. Think of it as a gigantic battery, slowly building up a charge. These buildings are strange, but architecture doesn't necessarily mean a secret society controls Washington. It's a bit of a leap in logic. What about the geography? Some believe the geography of Washington mimics important occult and Masonic symbols. The bizarre street layout traces acute angles rather than grids. This might look normal on the ground, but if we view the city from the air, things get strange. From overhead, the layout bears an eerie resemblance to a pentagram, a symbol commonly associated with ancient Greeks, Gnostic Christianity, and black magic. Fringe researchers think DC's street design takes advantage of ley lines to focus this geomantic or earth-based energy on the Capitol and the White House. It reminds me of the Nazca lines, enormous ancient shapes traced in the Peruvian desert. Could they be related? We already know Washington is a town built on secrets. The nation's national security and financial stability rest on the decisions made in the Pentagon and Congress, many of which the average citizen will never witness firsthand. Even the most skeptical observer will note the odd layout of DC's streets and the strange conceits in our national symbols. This is the country that slapped a floating eye and pyramid on our dollars. The eagle was a Masonic symbol before it became our national bird. Looking at the evidence, it's hard to deny that symbols in the U.S. match symbols in Freemasonry. But why? This could all be a coincidence. The imagery could be nothing more than decoration. But if the Masons believe that symbols themselves have powers, then what kind of power are they trying to generate? Is it merely psychological, or could it be something more? Something they don't want you to know.
Freemasonry uses Egyptian pagan symbols quite often, and we can see that. And one that comes to mind is the obelisk. The obelisk is a tall pillar in stone, tapered and square in section with a pyramidion on top, and that was used among the Egyptians as a resurrection symbol. And the idea was it was actually a phallic symbol. It stood tall and erect, and it was used to procreate, and one was resurrected through one's offspring, and that was the argument. Well, the same thing applies today, and we find that where Freemasons are buried, for instance, very often it'll be an obelisk that's used as a grave marker. Sir John A. Macdonald, first Prime Minister of Canada, or George Washington, first President of the United States. Their grave markers both contain obelisks, and sometimes even the obelisk will even contain the compass and square to indicate quite clearly where they're coming from.
But can this really be true? It seems incredible that Freemasonry, this system of morality, may actually be veiled paganism, and only lightly veiled at that. The point within a circle is one of the more prominent Masonic symbols. Past Grand Master Albert Mackey teaches in his Symbolism of Freemasonry, page 353, the point within a circle is derived from sun worship and is in reality of phallic origin. It is a symbol of the universe, the sun being represented by the point, while the circumference is the universe. Mackey states further in his Manual of the Lodge, page 56, the phallus was an imitation of the male generative organ. It was represented usually by a column, which was surmounted by a circle at its base. The point within a circle was intended by the ancients as a type of the prolific powers of nature, which they worshipped under the united form of the active or male principle and the passive or female principle. Paganism recognized and worshipped these powers as the creative force in nature. Albert Pike was Grand Commander of Scottish Rite Freemasonry in the 1800s. From his book, Morals and Dogma, the sun and moon represents the two grand principles of all generations, the active and passive, the male and female. Both shed their light upon their offspring, the blazing star, or Horus. These Masonic authorities agree that the symbols of Freemasonry are occultic and derived from paganism. The alleged occultic rituals and symbolism that are central to Freemasonry were tremendously significant to me personally. I had been deeply involved in the many facets of the occult, including witchcraft for a number of years. Witchcraft is the religion of paganism. It's the worship of the sun god and the moon goddess in various forms.
I was involved in the occult for about 12 years.
Steve Warr was a practicing member of a coven of witches.
For me, that is, I was constantly on a day-to-day basis reading, searching, as well as practicing arts such as divination, getting in contact with the dead through mediums, tarot cards, crystal balls, everything that we would consider occult, I was involved in.
There's a great deal of symbolism in witchcraft itself. Many of the implements used have significance in terms of natural elements, such as the wand representing air, the athame, a sword representing fire, a chalice with water, and a pentagram representing earth. And these would be combined in various manners in order to take advantage of the spiritual forces that were felt to be in operation at that particular time.
And it was heavily ritualistic, with the wearing of robes, the drawing of magic circles, the invoking of gods to aid the practitioner, as well as just anything you would do, even if it was not in a formal ritual, always had something to do with ritual. Even if it was casting a spell, you would always light the candles, bring out the elements, set up your altar.
Some of the parallels between Freemasonry and witchcraft show such a similarity that it cannot possibly be coincidental. Similarities in ritual, wording, and symbolism are so close in several instances that it clearly suggests a common origin. To examine this possibility, I spoke with a number of former Masons and compared their Blue Lodge initiations with the experiences of former occultists.
In the initiation in Freemasonry, we had to be recommended by another Mason.
Well, in order to join witchcraft, you have to be first screened. You have to be recommended by somebody currently in witchcraft.
Well, when I was initiated, I was blindfolded and bound by a rope, and on your bare chest was thrust the point of a spear.
In witchcraft, we were initiated through a very involved ritual, initiation ceremony, wherein the candidate was led blindfolded, bound by a rope to the edge of the magic circle.
And the rope is around your neck and you're led forward. And up front, in the eastern end of the building, is a person who's a worshipful master. And you kneel down before him as if he were a god.
You were met by the high priest or high priestess at that time, usually with a sword to your chest.
When I went to enter the lodge, a sharp object was put to my left breast. And I was warned that should I reveal any of the secrets of Freemasonry, to know what to expect.
When you're presented before the high priest, a sword is held against your chest, and you actually take a blood oath, promising to remain faithful to the secrets of witchcraft.
Well, when you are in the room, this blindfold is taken away from you, and this is a time when they say that you're coming from darkness into light.
During the initiation ceremony, the initiate is led by the lieutenant of the high priest and is challenged at the edge of the circle by someone saying, "Who goes there?" And the answer is, "One from the world of darkness."
In Masonry, the prayers are ended with "So mote it be."
Oh, and one of the other aspects of, or distinctives of the craft was that we would always end any spell or ritual where we released the power, this is where the power was released, with the word "So mote it be."
I was intrigued to discover that witchcraft and Freemasonry had so much in common. However, in white witchcraft, followers dismiss the biblical concept of Lucifer. Freemasonry goes so far as to actually call Lucifer God. In the words of Sovereign Pontiff of Universal Freemasonry, Albert Pike, yes, Lucifer is God, and unfortunately, Adonai, the Hebrew God of the Bible, is also God. And the true and pure philosophical religion is the belief in Lucifer, the equal of Adonai. But Lucifer, God of light and God of good, is struggling for humanity against Adonai, the God of darkness and evil. Listen to the words of 33rd degree Mason Manly P. Hall. When the Mason learns that the key to the warrior on the block is the proper application of the dynamo living power, he has learned the mystery of his craft. The seething energies of Lucifer are in his hands, and before he may step onward and upward, he must prove his ability to properly apply this energy. Of the literally millions of Masons worldwide, how many of them are actually aware of the true meaning of the Masonic symbols? The answer is very few. Since most Masons never go past the 3rd degree of the Blue Lodge, the rank of Master Mason, the vast majority of them never discover what they're involved in. And they never will discover what Freemasonry is all about, unless they venture into the higher levels of the Scottish Rite or the York Rite. In fact, they're not just ignorant, they're deliberately misled by their superiors in the lodge. In the words of Masonry's own authority, Albert Pike, the blue degrees are but the outer court or portico of the temple. Part of the symbols are displayed there to the initiate, but he is intentionally misled by false interpretations. It is not intended that he shall understand them, but it is intended that he shall imagine that he understands them.
Many Masons go through the first 3 degrees, become a Master Mason, and they just quit there, thinking that this is just a nice fraternal organization. And they do not realize that their own leaders have consciously lied and deceived to them because they do not want them to know the true teachings of Masonry.
I went in there with all good intentions, thinking I was entering into a fraternity that was really interested in helping people. But Now I realize that in the lower echelons, in the lower degrees, you don't realize what's happening.
Well, the meaning of the lodge and what it was about to me was a group of people who were out to help other people, and there were different things that you could see in the lodge. The people were close together, they were bound by something, and I thought it was a Christian organization.
What made one think that the lodge was a Christian place was the fact that I found people who were members of the same church to which I belong, the Presbyterian Church in Canada, were members of the lodge, members in prominent positions in the lodge. And the fact that these members in their rituals used quotations from Scripture sort of doubly made one think that it was okay.
They think that they are actually being initiated into a Christian organization. And it's because the 3 degrees in the Blue Lodge are veiled in a veneer of Christianity.
Easter was approaching, and one quiet morning I was at home recuperating from the second operation when the doorbell rang. It was a special delivery letter from the Supreme Council in Washington, notifying me that I had been selected for the 33rd degree. I could hardly believe it was true. This honor is one most Masons never even think of receiving. It was too much, too far out of reach, beyond limits of reality. It was unreal to think I had actually been selected. It was an honor just to be considered for this ultimate degree, and I had actually been selected, chosen by that small and powerful group, the Supreme Council of the 33rd degree. I called Bonnie to share the good news with her. In talking with her, I surprised myself by asking her if she thought I should accept it. What a strange thing to ask, I thought, but before I could contemplate it, she said, "Why, sure, why wouldn't you accept it? You've worked so hard for it. It's taken you so long to get there, by all means, you should accept it." So I returned my acceptance immediately and began making plans for the trip. Some of the world's most prominent and influential men in the world would undoubtedly be there to participate when I was given this ultimate degree. For me, little Jimmy Shaw, who had gone to work at age 5 and made it alone since age 13. They would be there to give the 33rd degree to me. It was really a bit difficult to take it all in. In order to receive the 33rd degree, it was necessary to go to Washington, D.C. The initiation and related functions were to last 3 days. Since Bonnie could participate in practically none of these things I would be doing each day, she decided not to go along. We were both excited as I made preparations to leave, but I was not as excited as I expected to be. The edge was taken off the excitement because inside me it was mixed with a considerable amount of conviction. Way down deep there was a growing restlessness, an increasing conflict, produced by the things the doctor had been sharing and by all the scripture I had been reading. Preparing to receive this ultimate honor was not as thrilling as it might otherwise have been. I flew into Washington National Airport and took a taxi to the house of the temple on Northwest 16th Street. Upon arriving at the temple, I was met by a receptionist who asked if I were there to receive the 33rd degree. I was surprised to find a woman in those sacred Masonic precincts, but said that I was and showed her my letter from the Supreme Council. She then told me that in order to receive the degree, I would be expected to make a, quote, minimum donation of a very large amount of money. At least it was a really large amount for me. So this took me completely by surprise, for there had been not a word about any such minimum donation in the letters sent me by the Supreme Council. I didn't carry that much money with me and had left my checkbook at home, but I was able to borrow some of the money from one of the other men, and I gave it to her. We candidates were all unhappy about this unpleasant surprise and grumbled to one another about it, but were not unhappy enough to forsake the degree over it. We were too close to the top of the mountain to turn back at this point. The house of the temple is quite impressive, a bit awesome really, standing large, gray, and silent on the east side of Northwest 16th Street between R and S Streets. It looms very wide and tall from the curb. There is a huge expanse of granite pavement in front of it, including 3 levels of narrowing steps as the entrance is approached. Flanking the entrance are 2 sphinx-like granite lions with women's heads, the neck of one entwined by a cobra and decorated with the ankh. Adorning the neck and breast of the other is an image of a woman, symbolic of fertility and procreation. In the pavement, just in front of the tall bronze doors, are 2 Egyptian swords with curved, serpentine blades, and between the swords, brass letters set in stone saying, "The Temple of the Supreme Council of the 33rd and last degree of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite." Over the tall bronze doors, cut into the stone, is the statement, "Freemasonry builds its temples in the hearts of men and among nations." High above the entrance, partially concealed by stone columns, is an elaborate image of the Egyptian sun god, backed with radiating sun and flanked by 6 large golden snakes. Inside is elegance. Polished marble, exotic wood, gold, and statuary. There are offices, a library, dining room, kitchen, council room, temple room, and a large meeting room. This room is like a luxurious theater, rather elegantly furnished and decorated. The ceiling is dark blue with lights set into it and give the appearance of stars. These lights can even be made to twinkle like stars in the sky. There's a stage well equipped and it's very nicely done, but the thing that is most noticeable is the way the walls are decorated with serpents. There are all kinds of serpents, some very long, some very large, some very small. Many of the Scottish Rite degrees include the representation of serpents, and I recognized them among those decorating the walls. It was almost impressive and gave me a strange mixture of the sensations of being in a temple and in a tomb. Something sacred but something threatening. I saw busts of outstanding men of the Rite, including 2 of Albert Pike, who were buried in the wall. The first day was devoted to registration, briefings, and interviews. We were called into one of the offices, one at a time, and interviewed by 3 members of the Supreme Council. When my turn came, I was ushered into the office and seated. The very first question I was asked was, "Of what religion are you?" Not long before this, I would have answered with something like, "I believe the ancient mysteries, the old religion, and I believe in reincarnation." However, without thinking at all about how to answer, I found myself saying, "I'm a Christian." Then, to my surprise, and theirs, I asked them, "Are you men born again?" The man in charge quickly stopped me by saying, "We're not here to talk about that. We're here to ask you questions." After they sent me back out, I sat down and thought about it. When the next man came out, I asked him, "Did they ask you if you were a Christian?" And he said, "Yes, they did." "Well, what did you tell them?" I asked. And he replied, "I told them hell no, and I never intend to be." Then he said a strange thing to me. He said, "You know, they said I'm going higher." And he left through a different door, looking pleased. The second day was the day of the actual initiation, held in the theater-like meeting room. Those of us who were receiving the degree were seated, and the ceremony was exemplified, or acted out in full costume, right before us, in the same way that we had performed the lesser degrees of the Scottish Rite all those years before. The parts in the exemplification were played by men of the 33rd degree. The representative candidate was dressed in black trousers, barefooted, bareheaded, and draped in a long black robe that reminded me of a very long black raincoat. He had a black cable tow around his neck, but was not hoodwinked. During the initiation, he was led around the stage, conducted by 2 men with swords, as the degree was performed for us. Instructions and signs were given. Upon the altar were 4 holy books, the Bible, the Quran, the Book of the Law, and the Hindu scriptures. At one point, the candidate was told to kiss the book, in quotes, "of your religion," and representing us all, he leaned forward and did so. I remembered the first degree initiation when I was told to kiss the Bible, and at that moment something came full cycle. It was the final such kiss to be a part of my life. When it was time for the final obligation, we all stood and repeated the oath with the representative candidate, administered by the Sovereign Grand Inspector General. We then swore true allegiance to the Supreme Council of the 33rd degree, above all other allegiances, and swore never to recognize any other brother as being a member of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, unless he also recognizes the supreme authority of this Supreme Council. One of the conductors then handed the candidate a human skull upside down with wine inside of it. May this wine I now drink become a deadly poison to me, as the hemlock juice drunk by Socrates, should I ever knowingly or willfully violate the same. He then drank the wine. A skeleton, one of the brothers dressed like one, he looked very convincing, then stepped out of the shadows and threw his arms around the candidate. Then he and we continued the sealing of the obligation by saying, "And may these cold arms forever encircle me, should I ever knowingly or willfully violate the same." The Sovereign Grand Commander closed the meeting of the Supreme Council with the mystic numbers, striking with his sword 5, 3, 1, and then 2 times. After the closing prayer, we all said, "Amen, Amen, Amen," and it was over. There were some extremely prominent men there that day, including a Scandinavian king, 2 former presidents of the United States, an internationally prominent evangelist, 2 other internationally prominent clergymen, and a very high official of the federal government, the one who actually presented me with the 33rd degree certificate. Some made only brief appearances, others stayed much longer. However, they didn't do much mixing or socializing with us, except for those whom they'd already known. Even though these celebrities weren't extremely brotherly, it was still quite an experience for me just to be associated with them. It was easily the largest gathering of such prominent and influential men of which I have ever been a part of. The 3rd day there was a banquet to celebrate our becoming Grand Inspectors General 33rd degree. The banquet was a little anticlimactic, at least for me, and I was anxious to get it over with so I could return home. It was good to be a 33rd at last. But it wasn't as exciting or fulfilling as I had thought it would be during all those years in the craft. I guess this was because of the profound changes going on deep within me. I'd returned home as soon as the 33rd degree award and related social functions were finished, for it was time for my next appointment with the doctor. After he had examined my eyes, he said they were healing fine, that he had felt good about the way they were looking, and as usual he spoke with me about the Lord. I told him that I had planned to come to his church the next Sunday and that I had been reading my Bible. Obviously pleased, he said, "Good, keep studying, and your sight will soon be much better." By this time I knew what he meant. He was speaking of my spiritual sight. In the Scottish Rite, the Thursday before Easter is called Maundy Thursday, and it's a very important day. On this day we always performed a special service of communion in the local Scottish Rite temple. At this time I was Wise Master in the chapter of Rose Craw, and it was my job to preside over the exemplification of the ceremony. I had done this many times, and was known for my knowledge of the service and for doing a good job. On Thursday evening we gathered at our home temple and dressed for the ceremony. It was always a most solemn occasion and seemed a little awesome at the same time, even to those of us who had done it so many times before. We were dressed in long, black, hooded robes. We marched in, single file, with only our faces partly showing, and we took our seats. There was something very tomb-like about the setting. The silence was broken only by an organ, playing mournfully in the background, and there was no light except for the little bit that came through the windows. After the opening prayer, from which the name of Jesus Christ was conspicuously excluded, I stood and I opened the service. As I had done so many times before, I said, "We meet this day to commemorate the death of our most wise and perfect Master, not as inspired or divine, for this is not for us to decide, but as at least the greatest of the apostles of mankind." As I spoke these words that I had spoken so many times before, I had a strange and powerful experience. It was as if I were standing apart, listening to myself as I spoke, and the words echoed deep within me, shouting their significance. They were the same words I had spoken so many times before, but had meaning for me now. They made me sick, literally ill, and I stopped. The realization of what I had just said grew within me like the rising of a crescendo. I had just called Jesus an apostle of mankind, who was neither inspired nor divine. There was a silent pause that seemed to last a very long time as I struggled with a sick, smothering within. When I was fully able, I continued with the service, and we gathered around a large table across the room in marching order. Once we were assembled at the table, I elevated the plate of bread, and I took a piece. I put my hand on the shoulder of the man in front of me, gave him the plate, and said, "Take, eat, and give to the hungry." This continued until all had partaken of the bread. Then I lifted up the goblet of wine, took a sip, and said, "Take, drink, and give to the thirsty." Again, this continued until all had partaken. Then I took the bread, walked over to the first row of spectators, and served it to the man previously chosen for the honor of representing the rest of the lodge. As I handed it to him, again I said, "Take, eat, and give to the hungry." In like manner, I served the wine to him, saying, "Take, drink, and give to the thirsty." And he sat down. After this, we took our places at the table, shaped like a cross, and sat down. The setting was dark. Our long, sweeping robes were solid black, our faces neatly concealed in the hoods, and the mood was one of very heavy gloom. The Christless prayers and the hymns we sang fit right in. The one word that would describe the entire event to me would be black. It was indeed a black communion. It felt like a large, strange black mass. There was a large menorah in the center of the room, with 7 candles now burning. Standing again, I said, "This is indeed a sad day, for we have lost our master. We may never see him again. He is dead. Mourn, weep, and cry, for he is gone." Then I asked the officers to extinguish the candles in the large menorah. One by one they rose, they walked to the center of the room, and extinguished the candle, leaving the room right after. Finally, with only the center candle still remaining, I arose, walked sadly to the menorah, and extinguished the last candle, the candle representing the life of Jesus, our most wise and perfect master. We had dramatized and commemorated the snuffing out of the life of Jesus, without once mentioning his name, and the scene ended with the room in deep, dark silence. I walked out of the room, leaving only the darkness and the stillness of death. Once again, the single word best to describe it would be black. All through the service I was shaking and sick. I have never felt so sad. I had stumbled over the words, but somehow I made it to the completion of the ceremony and went back to the dressing room. I still didn't know much about praying, but felt that I had been sustained by the Lord through it all. Back in the dressing room, we hung up our black hooded robes, put our street clothes back on, and prepared to leave. Less than 2 hours had passed since I had arrived, but what had happened in that period of time had changed my life forever. Still sick in my heart, I changed clothes without a word to anyone. The others asked me what was wrong. I couldn't reply. They reminded me that I had acted as wise masters so many times before, that I was known for my smooth performance, and they asked what had gone wrong. I was choking on the awful reality of what we had said and done, the way we had blasphemed the Lord, and the evil black mockery we had made of his pure and selfless death. With weeping welling up within me, I could only shake my head in silence and walk out. Mike was waiting for me at the door, expecting to get a ride home, and he asked, "What's the matter, Jim? Are you sick?" Finally able to speak, I quietly replied, "No, Mike. I'm just sick of this. I'm just sick of all this." I started down the wide steps in front of the large Scottish Rite temple. The realization and conviction was growing within me. I reached the bottom step and I stopped. Turning around, I looked back at the huge granite building and slowly studied the words. Carved in the stone across the top of the entrance, it said, "Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite to Freemasonry." Something came clearly into focus in my understanding, and I made a decision. This crisis point in my life, one which had required so many years for me to reach, passed in seconds. The truth was revealed and the choice was made, a choice that would be the difference between darkness and light, death and life, one that would last for eternity. Looking up at those words I had walked under so many times, words of which I had been so proud, I spoke to myself out loud. It was as if I were the only man in the world, as I heard myself say, slowly and deliberately, "It isn't ancient, it isn't Scottish, it isn't free, and it isn't right." I turned away and I walked into the parking lot, knowing that I would never return. As I walked into the deepening darkness of that springtime night, I was walking into the growing light of the living God. As the natural darkness closed around me, the supernatural light welled up within me. With every step I took, as the temple receded behind me, I was more free. I will never return. The decision was made on that day. The die was cast. From that night onward I would serve the true and living God, not the great architect of the universe. I would exalt and learn of him, not Osiris, Krishna, or Demeter. I would seek and follow Jesus, not the will-o'-the-wisp of the hidden wisdoms.
On. However, said, when you get past the 32nd degree, when you go to 33rd degree Freemasonry, it becomes something entirely different.
Okay, what if someone was a 33rd degree Mason, what would they know that the others don't?
Well, for instance, I had a state senator ask me basically, he said, were you aware that at the inauguration of every United States president, that in Washington, D.C., an occult ritual is held to raise the spirit of Osiris from the underworld so that it can take its rightful place in every United States president? That absolutely blew me away.
Yeah,
I thought,
this is within Masons?
That's within Masons. As a matter of fact, I went there to verify it myself. I took my wife, Nita, with me, but I wanted to know if that was a fact, because if that's true, that's an astonishing idea that an occult ritual such as that would be held.
Okay, and how long were you a Mason for?
9 years.
And how high up did you go?
Well, I went through the typical Blue Lodge degrees, went through York Rite all the way up to the Knights Templar Commandery, went through the Scottish Rite all the way up to 32nd degree, and at that time, then I was considered worthy to get into what is called esoteric Freemasonry, which most American Masons don't even know exists. And in that organization, I was admitted into the Rite of Memphis Mitzrayim, and I went up to 90th degree, which a lot of Masons, if they even hear that, they will, their false teeth will fall on their heads. But there are actually at least 97 degrees in the higher level esoteric rite.
Right. Were you surprised when you found that there were more than 33 degrees?
No, not really. See, here's how this works. When I went through the Masonic rituals, I had the spirit guides in my ear whispering things, telling me to do things, telling me to answer certain things in certain ways. Because I did that, I was identified by the leadership of the Grand Lodge of the state of Wisconsin that I was someone a little bit extraordinary. And see, that's one of the ways in which I ultimately got contacted by the Illuminati, is because the spirit guides had given me certain key things to say, key things to do, even gestures to make, stuff like that, that would identify me as being someone who was worthy of more light. You see, that's what they promise in all the Masonic degrees. They say, you get light, you get further light, you get more light. And of course, where does this light come from? Well, if you read the writings of the Masonic leaders, that comes from Lucifer.
And how many Masons know that?
Maybe 1 in 1,000, but most of them don't have a clue unless they bothered to toddle upstairs and read the books that are in their own Masonic libraries, like I did.
How many Master Masons know that there are Satanists among them?
I'd say the same figure I quoted earlier, 1 in 1,000.
Right. Since Catholics are strictly forbidden to be Masons, why were you being asked to do two opposite things?
What people don't realize is that the Catholic Church helped start the Masons. And that, for example, the Scottish Rite, most of the degrees in the Scottish Rite were written by Jesuits. So even though there is this apparent antipathy between the Masons and the Catholics, to the point that up until John Paul II's reign, if you became a Mason, you were a Roman Catholic, you were de facto excommunicated, just like that. But actually it's all a sham, because most of the high level of people in the Vatican are all Freemasons, and many of the people that are Freemasons are Catholics. It's like the old Hegelian idea, which he actually got from the Illuminati, of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. You have two opposing things, and they fight, and they come together, and they create and in this case, the idea would be to create a one-world religion out of these two opposites. The two things come together, and they merge. And that's actually happening right now before our very eyes. Because, for example, I don't know this, but I have serious reason to believe that the new Pope is in fact a Freemason. The old Pope who just died was a Freemason. The Pope before him was a Freemason.
How do you know
that? The
that?
Pope before him was not only a Freemason, but a Rosicrucian.
How do you know that?
Well, the Angelo Roncalli, who was John the 23rd, he was a member of a very high-level Rosicrucian Masonic order. There are records to that effect, and that's been documented in a book called The Broken Cross. I forget the author, but you can look it up on the internet, I'm sure. Paul VI, almost every one of those cardinals, those new cardinals, were Freemasons. Now, by inference, we can assume that he was probably a Freemason, but that's only circumstantial. When John Paul II was shot, he gave the Grand Masonic Hailing Sign of Distress.
Oh, okay.
Which is what Masons do when they're in dire straits. Also, John Paul II is the Pope who issued the bull, which is what, like a papal decree, it's called a papal bull, that basically removed the ban on Freemasonry.
Oh, okay.
Which is also somewhat telling.
Wow.
So the actual secret is that Masonry is a sex cult.
Wow.
And that's why they wear their apron over their Holy of Holies. Just like there's a veil in the Temple of Solomon that covers the holy place where the Ark of the Covenant is. Well, this is the Holy of Holies of the Mason. That's why Masonic monuments are obelisks. Like Washington's monument, the largest obelisk in the world. He was a Freemason. It's a giant phallic symbol.
It's all there for everyone to see.
That is what the Masons mean by resurrection.
Wow.
If you go to a Masonic funeral, they talk about the sure and certain hope of the resurrection. When they say that word, they don't mean what all the nice, Christian people sitting in their chairs think they mean. They're talking about the fact that the phallus dies and then rises again.
Well, Tom, how in the world did Washington, D.C. and the Vatican have these Masonic symbols and buildings, etc.? Where'd that come from?
Well, again, it goes back to the influences of these early Freemasons who had an idea about how they wanted to build what we would call an occult democracy. For instance, you can go to the Library of Congress website and read an article called The Most Approved Plan. And this goes back to early America, where they were advertising for different architectural firms to submit their plan about how the capital city could be built. And after all the plans came in, our own government website says they were all rejected because Thomas Jefferson wanted a plan that would be based similar to the design in Rome, where you would have a dome facing an obelisk, and furthermore, he wanted it dedicated to all pagan gods. That's on our own government website, so that's exactly what
this represents the sexual organs. They say the Washington Monument, and you say the Capitol represents that. What does that mean in Masonic and occultic terms?
Well, because the Freemasons, a great deal of their mysticism is based on ancient Egyptian magic. And this design, a dome, which is the ever-pregnant belly of Isis in their mythology, facing an obelisk, which is the erect manhood of the god Osiris, was a magic utility. This was designed in ancient Egypt for one purpose, and that was to raise from the underworld the spirit of Osiris so he could take his place in the Pharaoh, so that the country, Egypt, could have divine representation in their king. Well, that's exactly the template you have laid out in Washington, D.C. It's exactly the template you have at the Vatican.
Why is it the same things in the Vatican?
Same thing at the Vatican, where you have a dome facing an obelisk. As a matter of fact, the obelisk in St. Peter's Square was removed from the ancient city of Heliopolis, where it was built and dedicated to the god Osiris. And when they took it to the Vatican, and when Pope Sixtus had it put in the middle of the square there, he actually performed an exorcism on it, trying to expel the demon of Osiris from the obelisk.
And again, this Osiris is the same, it's a code for Antichrist of the New Covenant.
Well, it is the god Apollo to the Greeks. In fact, you see that marriage not only on the Great Seal. Look at the Statue of Liberty, who was built by Eiffel, the famous Eiffel Tower builder, that was built by French Freemasons.
That's a cult too?
Well, it is, according to its own literature. You can look it up and read it yourself. It was built to have the body of Isis, which was dedicated to Osiris, and the head of Apollo. So once again, it is the marriage of the Egyptian Osiris and the Greek god Apollo, which is one and the same, according to many ancient historians.
Now, you say there's a Masonic significance even to 9/11.
Well, we believe there is. And without getting bogged down, President George W. Bush, January 20, 2001, he steps up, he gives his inaugural, and twice he refers to the angel that rides in the whirlwind and directs this storm.
Where'd that term come from?
That is a Freemason. Well, first of all, it's an occultic term. It refers to Metatron. There's various names for the angel in the whirlwind. But for years, in fact, for at least a decade before 9/11, occultists said that when it came time to initiate the New World Order, the code word would be the angel in the whirlwind. And if you go in where I have been, into the house of the temple, the headquarters of the 33rd degree Freemasons, they have a dedicatory in there to George W. Bush for donating more than $1 million to help propagate Freemasonry in the United States.
When Masons say that Jesus Christ is simply another great moral teacher, another great moral prophet, equal with Buddha. In fact, Masons teach, according to Albert Pike, that Buddha was the first great Masonic teacher. So they're equating Jesus with Buddha, with Muhammad, with the religious leaders as just another religious leader. He is not God. He is not the incarnate Savior who came to save men from their sins, because Masons do not need a Savior. Masons feel they can save themselves through moral good deeds.
In the lodge that I belong to, we had a Muslim apply for membership. And the membership of our lodge didn't know how to initiate him because we knew we couldn't initiate him on the Holy Bible. So we wrote a letter to the Grand Lodge of Alberta asking them for instruction. And a letter came back stating that we should place the Koran and the square and compass beside the Bible and the square and compass on the altar and initiate him with full honors.
Bible-believing Christians accept the fact that God exists in a trinity of three persons, that is, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But what most people, including many Masons, don't realize is that the God of Freemasons, the great architect of the universe, is also a trinity.
In both the Scottish and York Rite, you discover that Masons are on a journey seeking to find the lost name of God. Part of their religion, they say, is that the sacred name of God has been lost. And they tell this whole story of the building of Solomon's temple and the architect Hiram Abiff, who in building the temple lost the sacred name of God. And so they say that Masons are on this search to recover the lost name of God. And finally, when you get to the Royal Arch degree, the Mason is finally told what the secret name of God is that only Masons can know. And they pride themselves that they alone are the custodians of the secret name of God. And that name can only be whispered among Masons by three Masons, each saying a syllable. The name is Jobulon. It is a combination of three words: Jehovah, Baal, and Osiris, the Egyptian sun god.
Yah, Baal, on. Yah, Baal, on. Yah.
And what a Mason is worshiping in the Masonic Lodge is a three-headed god made up of Jehovah, Baal, which was the fertility god of Baalbek in Lebanon, and Osiris, the Egyptian sun god, represented by the phallic symbol, the sexual worship in Egypt. And they have combined this into a three-headed monster and say that is the Masonic god they worship.
Salvation to the Christian is based entirely upon the vicarious sacrifice of Jesus Christ on the cross. The Bible teaches that all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. It teaches that no matter how hard we work to be good, we can never attain to the standards of the sinless Almighty. But God gives the free gift of eternal life to those who believe in Jesus Christ and allow Him to pay for their sins on His cross. In the words of John 3:16, "For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in Him should not perish, but have everlasting life." Salvation to the Mason is something entirely different. Masons are counting on their own good works, something that the Bible says cannot possibly save them. In fact, the Masonic Monitor teaches that God, the all-seeing eye, will reward men according to their works. The all-seeing eye pervades the inmost recesses of the human heart and will reward us according to our merits. In the 19th degree of the Scottish Rite, the Mason is told, "Masons who have given proof of their attachment to the statutes and rules of the order, which in the end will make them deserving of entering the celestial Jerusalem, or heaven. The 28th degree of the Scottish Rite states, the true Mason raises himself by degrees till he reaches heaven.
Masons believe that they can earn their salvation, and they can climb a ladder up to God they call the great architect of the universe, and that one day they'll stand before God and God will usher them into heaven, not because of Jesus Christ, but because they were a good Mason and they did all of these good works. In fact, I was speaking to the head potentate of the shrine in Minneapolis, where I'm from. He called me up one day and he had heard my tape on Masonry. He says, how dare you say that Masonry is not Christian? He says, I'm a deacon in my church. I teach Sunday school in my church. He says, I'm a good Christian. He says, and I'm the head of the shrine. How can you say I'm not a Christian? And I stopped and I asked him one question. I said, well, sir, I said, if you were to die and stand before God tonight, and he should ask you, why should I let you into my heaven? I said, what would you say to him? I'll never forget, there was a silence for about 10, 15 seconds, and then he said to me, he said, well, I guess I would tell him I was a good Mason.
If Masons are depending upon the lodge to save them, then their trust is as misplaced as those who depend upon church membership rather than on Christ. One might just as well depend on belonging to the Kiwanis or Rotary Club if good works would save us.
I was speaking down in Texas, in South Texas, where in a large church, the Masons who were in the church, many of them on the elder board, saw my tape Sunday morning when I was speaking there, and they said, you know, why are we allowing this man into our church? He's criticizing Freemasonry. And most of the elder board were Masons. The Sunday school teachers were Masons. In fact, one of the elders was the worshipful master of the lodge in town. Another one was the supreme potentate of the shrine. And they came to me after the service, and I said, well, you have the books. I said, look up in your own books, in context, what I say. I gave the chapters, of the page numbers. They spent till 4 in the morning Sunday night going through all the documentation in their own Masonic library. They came back Monday and they said, we want you to know, Ron, we all resigned from the lodge last night. And we are seeing this happen all across the country as Masons will peel away the outer wrapping of the package and examine the content of what they're in. They will discover that they are in a non-Christian, pagan, idolatrous cult, and no Christian has any part in it.